Maria has already told us she's been working on health and social issues for 50 years.
Yes, 1974 I started as a social worker in Aspudden, a really poor area at that time outside of Stockholm. I worked for 15 years as a social worker. So I'm not a bureaucrat, I'm not a communication officer, I'm an old social worker from the beginning.
And Bernt, he has been around for some while.
Yeah, I've been in different sectors of life. So I've been, my first job in the ministry was in the Ministry of Defence, which was a bit more different from this one. But as my old friend who's died now many years ago, he said, had the sort of general view, all jobs are alike. They are the same. Whether you work in that and that or that, you have many other things alike, and you also get quite a lot of experience from other sectors which are relevant, and that is part of the discussion we're also coming back to.
Yeah. And I have to say, I have met them for around 20 years ago. Me and Maria were in the same corridors in DG Sanko in Luxembourg.
Yes.
As a seconded expert, Maria on alcohol and I was on nutrition. Bernt, I also met around 20 years ago. You were representing Norway in a lot of meetings in the Commission. But I also have to highlight that Bernt is actually one of the founding fathers of our Brussels office, Actis Brussels office. And I always used to promote, I was quite impressed over Actis doing this at such an early stage. Already in '94, we were one of the first Norwegian officers in Brussels. But it came to me last night. We were watching the torchlight demonstration outside the Parliament. We have a tradition in Norway for these torchlight, especially when it comes to treatment beds. And for hospitals, we go in demonstration after demonstration and torchlights fighting. Will we see in the future prevention torchlights? Can you imagine that we get people, I mean, one is the treatment bed. Can you imagine that we will see prevention highlighted in the same way among population?
Well, first of all, having worked I've even worked in the Ministry of Finance, and I think that what you see if you were thinking of all issues as logic, and you are spending the money according to the best efficiency in the long run, then of course preventive policies would have had the high priority, and the curative policies of hospital would have lower priority. You would let people die rather than. But that's the rationale if you're taking that sort of measures, and that is I think one should always understand that there is much easier to mobilize the keeping up of birth possibilities on the regional level or local hospitals than it would be to mobilize on general population level approaches. It's a different kind of thing. And that is, I think, also why it is very important for the organizations that are promoting is to go through and think, what are we not promoting, or how are we appearing? And I think there is what is now been, I think this which was we heard from the EU with that comprehensive project on the joint action it's the very importance of having a comprehensive approach. I think that is very important, as you were mentioning in your presentation, that it's very important, and then of course to join with those with common approaches. And we have seen, I've only left work 1st of January this year, so I've been sort of following quite closely up until lately. But we've seen in some of the works that have been done during the NordAN Dimension corporations, for instance, we had this seminar with people from the other areas that are interested in population level and taxation, and whether it's medicine or medicines or it's tobacco. or eat nutrition sides. And if they are not just only living in a corridor and sort of do not sort of join up. In the beginning, when I started in this work, in the 90s and the early as the Danes called for the zeros, the nullerne, then that was the tobacco people didn't want to have anything to do with us, because they were afraid that the alcohol side had a weaker position than the tobacco, so they wanted a clean discussion. And then there are people in the alcohol side that is so concerned about their arguments that they had at some stage, some of the network on the international level didn't join up in a broader network of cooperation towards the WHO, so they didn't get the formal position in the WHO because they wanted a clean role of just discussing us. And one has to have a look through one's own approach to the understanding of the role, and to this discussion, which we can come back to, I suppose, this discussion you've had now about the relations to the industry. That's another area of that. But I think just to have this sort of the mobilization, so I said to your question, I don't think you would ever have a torch demanding for wine monopolies keeping up. I don't think you would have that. But you would have when you make, like which we now got from this Mrs. Paradise presentation, is this sort of approach, a broader, comprehensive approach, and that you are managing to mobilize that, and you get all the arguments, and you get on, as we saw in Iceland, all these people that have an authority. That is very important. And then that you try to avoid people, but for instance, I've not been drinking alcohol, so I've been in the temperance background. And when I come to parties and people, do you have anything against us drinking wine? It is not me this is about. But the temperance movement have developed that as a part of in the old days, as a part of the control mechanism. So that this is not about me, it's about yourself. You are doing harm, you're not doing harm to me, which is of course a different thing from tobacco with the passive drinking, the smoking. But this, they have to go through and think about how are you, what is people, how do people, what do they listen, what do they understand of what you're saying? And that is a big challenge, how to go through that, have a critical approach to that.
Do you have a suggestion?
Yes. No, I wanted to come away from us, people working with alcohol policy and other, and look at outside instead. To your question, I remember when the alcopops became a problem in the EU with young people, when actually people themselves experience problems. And I think that that's what we quite often forget. I mean, if you look at climate, everything else, it's when they themselves can see, in addition to, I agree with you are saying, of course, the comprehensiveness and everything like that. But I think that we much more must concentrate at least a little bit more about what's happening in the society, and to sort of listen closely. So what is actually worrying people now, instead of what worrying us? What is worrying people? And one thing related to alcohol monopolies, I would say, I think that most people are a little bit worried if they would realize that, for example, farm sales would threaten the monopoly. The reason why they are not sort of concerned about farm sales is that they still believe it won't threaten the monopolies. It can be both. And I think that I take this as two examples. The alcohol pop issue, when I was working at the European Commission, and now when I can see we need to find the angle, the perspective where actually people care, not our own sort of do you understand what I mean? Yeah, because I think I've been, like you, worked so long, and I can see that we miss a lot. We are so concerned debating between ourselves. And my next, I won't say much more than on this, I think we need to find the links with other working on public health. As your tobacco thing, I think it's a good thing to say. I mean, we can't stand alone. We need to find a way. How can we work with all the others that actually also working to protect public health? And then we need to compromise also, of course. Cooperation needs to listen to others and find out, oh, this is an issue where we actually could work together. We are all concerned about this. Cancer is a good thing, I think. For the first time, we actually work closely together with those working on cancer prevention. With that, that's what's my answer to
But
it.
I think what Rebecca was saying about calling it farm sales is so idyllic. It's about almost like the wine. You know, wine, we're walking on the grapes and it's so farm and this is far from the truth. And I think that is also very important that we...
I can add a fact there. You're here, Fredrik. If you compare the microbrewers, at least in Sweden, how many, if they are 500, 600, how many outlets or whatever you can call it, would it be?
On farms.
No, not on farms. They are in microbrewers inside the cities.
Of course. But they're called farm products.
The difference between 650 and 800.
Yeah, because people they see the sort of farm,
Yes, yeah.
but in reality, it's over 600 microbrewers in the middle of the cities. Knowledge
is the thing all the time. I was also thinking one thing today, because we are looking to the future. It's very easy to look backwards for us, but we are actually looking at where do we go from here. And one thing that's very high on the agenda now is the economic and commercial determinants of health. I know, shall I start with Bernt?
Yes, I think so.
Do you have any thoughts about this?
Well, I think that it has, we were saying about the policies, this is what we are now discussing, what is now about these projects that's been presented, is all under more or less all of them under the headline of population level approaches. And that is a rational best. But you will always have the problem with the immediate creative need. And that will always be a challenge. So some of these cost-effective things, when I was working 100 years ago in transportation, I was working about an issue which was called cost-benefit analysis in transportation, and how can policy workers utilize that. And the problem there was that they were measuring this in a way that the way you were measuring the effects and the benefits, you would have to know that in detail to show what is in reality these numbers tell you. And that was what many of these people that went with the IOGT NTO in Sweden and so were producing enormous amounts of money, and then you should think that these would all then rush into the state money and then having better distribution. But the effect, for instance, on transportation, which I was talking about, was the shortening time the driver used with the new road. And that was the benefit of his, not the benefit of the general population. And this is how this can be very easily. And is it strong enough? I don't think that is strong enough. I think you have to have that. But I'm very, if you're talking about the development, when I started this, went down to the DG Sanko, what's it called, yeah? And they were looking upon us as some kind of funny people from the north that had some stupid ideas about anything. Now that is totally different on the academic side. When you meet these meetings, the people that you were talking about, there is a much larger consensus about the relations and the broadness and the knowledge of somatic diseases. When I started, that was not the case. That was everything about addiction. And now it's much more on the sort of broader thing. But the general population hasn't gone there. They are still on addiction, as you were saying. Yeah. And that, I think, is a challenge. And but I'm very reluctant to try to sell this to politicians with some numbers on cost effectiveness.
But I am really in favor of more thinking about how to join public health policy, social policy, as I'm coming from myself from the social field, and consumer policy, and see how these different policy areas actually have quite a lot in common. And to focus and see what do we have in common, where we can work together, all these policy areas. On a politician level also. We focus so much about talking about the alcohol industry. And I can say that I think I was misunderstood, but I'm a little bit tired on us focusing so much on how to fight against the alcohol industry. Because the most important is how to win public support. That is what we should focus on. And I introduced, when I worked with the Commission actually, and together, and I still think that term is better, economic operators. Because it's the economic operators. If you don't realize that the whole issue of economic operators is actually what it's about. And we missed it this time because it was the retailers, it was not the alcohol industry, even if they lobby, of course, they always do. But so I think that the economic operators and be more aware of when it comes to EU law, because what I was talking about, we can also use the sort of EU regulation. And that is when I think that we should use some of the industry, as I use the name now, because then it's actually the wine producers or whatever. It's when it comes to EU regulation, because that is actually on our side this time, because the exclusive right will be threatened. When I look at Fredrik now, I mean, and we need to realize that we have to find those who actually are afraid in the same way as we are to lose the monopoly. And I think the reason why we are concerned is also that we have retail monopolies. And retail monopolies quite popular among some groups, even in the economic operators group. I just wanted to clarify what I meant.
Very good. I know, Gabriel, you wanted to comment.
Yes. Well, we're talking about how to impress politicians, and I just have to remind you that the politicians that I know, and I met a few.
And you've been yourself a politician.
Yeah. That is what I was indicating. And politicians are just ordinary people. Yeah. Just ordinary human beings, and they are different. One of the things most of them have in common is that they want to be re-elected.
Yes.
So we can always go to politicians and tell them that this thing is what your voters believe in. But we have to, and also I should add that most of the politicians that I know from almost all different parties, they are decent people.
Yeah.
They want to do good for society with the prime condition of being re-elected. Of course, some of them don't run again, but most of them want to have their party come out well anyway. Now, we are in a little gloomy mood right now because there's so much populist and so much threats, so many threats against the reasonable alcohol policy. But if you look back, when I started doing alcohol policy, most politicians thought that alcohol is a good business for society. If we have achieved one thing, I don't think politicians believe that anymore.
No.
They know that both the state and the municipalities and the regions are losing money because of alcohol. And if more alcohol is consumed, tax revenue increases, but the costs increase much more. This took a long time to put that through, but now I think we have succeeded in convincing politicians that even if there is, but this truth has to be repeated on and on and on again, because there's always commercial things like the farm sales. Some people think that increased local alcohol industry contributes to employment and to the village or the city or the region. We have to remind all the time that this truth was established, but it has to be repeated over and over again. So that was one point that I think is in a little more optimistic note, that we have at least achieved some increased knowledge.
Yeah, I just have to say, I totally agree with you. I think that we lose history, because I also started at the same time as Gabriel. And I think that when we now... Compared to you, yes. But I just, we forget actually that the attitudes for 20, 30 years ago was quite negative to alcohol policy, to monopolies, to everything, and the politicians, as I said. And today it's totally different. It's actually, we have to see that we achieve things. And I would now like to go to talk about what could be done in the future. It's so easy to talk about everything and what's wrong and so on. But what are you going to do now? I'm over 70, so I'm a little bit old. But you are young, most of you. So what are you going to do? What learning will you take from us elderly? Don't do the same mistake as we. Don't believe that you can, through campaigns, I have to say that, you have to have a long cycle. You have to have a sort of thinking 20 years. How can, because changing things takes a long time. You can't think just for 6 months or something. What will you do in 10 years? What do you want to achieve in 10 years? That's my question to you. That.
Was it to me? No.
No, not to you.
But I just want to say what Gabriel did when he was Minister of Social Affairs in Sweden in the 70s. And then they had been starting a new turn from the WHO with the reports in the academics started to change from only addressing the addiction to see the broader alcohol policy issues. And then what you did, which was played a very important role in, was to develop this knowledge into the policy arena and participating in that. That was very important. And you were also very active participating in the seminars, etc., that was done from the WHO side. And there is one thing which I think is very important. That is to be aware of the difference in the role between the EU and the WHO, because the WHO has a mandate of being a normative body. So they can pursue all these issues. That is much more difficult for the for the EU. And that is why it is so important to have these tools with us. And then back to this discussion, which Mrs. Norton was bringing up here, that I think that we should not go into any kind of alliance with the industry. Of course, you must understand who are the enemies. But there is always in military and in policies, you must learn what do the enemy think. Because there has been in the temperance movement a tendency to celebrate their losses, to celebrate their defeats by telling them that we had won hadn't it been for the alcohol industry. And that is a very easy way out. That is not the sort of answering. And because the game here is, we've had in Norway that the beer industry was not interested in violating the monopoly because that would open up for foreign beer industry. The wines industries were reasons why they were the old importers that wanted to keep their role in the Norwegian market, and they didn't want to be interfered by all these sort of shops that you were mentioning. And so there are many, and then one has to understand what, and sometimes to be clever and play them each against each other, but never go into giving them any kind of legality through cooperation with you.
I was looking at also earlier, we saw these children. IOGT was showing children and Albertil, you know, how they are affected and families are affected. And I was thinking slightly, because we are today very individual. You know, we talk about my health, I cannot drink so much so I get more healthy, we have to do this and that. Is that always a good way forward? Are we too individual? Because we saw also on the Jamr event, you know, that the societal contra the individual. So how do we balance those two things? Do we have any way forward?
Well, I think that this is the general political challenge now for all sort of population level approaches, because it's challenged by the policies, the parties that now in getting forward, they are arguing in basis that it's the responsibility of each. And I think that this issue of health literacy has a danger if you're not carrying that word with balance, that you're not putting that you put all the issues to the individuals, as they should learn how to act, and that is the responsibility. If you haven't done that, you can and you see some people arguing it, people that you should have, like you have already in American insurance, which are financing the health system in the United States, that if you drink and if you eat too much fast food and all that sort of thing, and you get fat and you get alcohol dependent, well, that is your business, and we will not pay for it. And that is a change. This is if sort of systematically, and it's a very, very, very important issue you're bringing up, and I think one should underline the need for a communal approach to issues, and not sort of and the challenge that this sort of very strong individuals that you have, right? My wife is teaching in the human rights at school. Then they have discussions in school, and then somebody says an issue position, and then she says, "Yeah, how would you argue that?" And she says, "Well, this is what I feel." And everybody thinks that's an answer to the question, and this is a problem.
But it's actually what's dominating today, the individual. So I agree with you. It's a much broader problem, because it's the individual freedom, and that is also, I mean, one of the backgrounds why this investigation that I'm working now is existing. Is actually that it was sort of the two things. It's an individual choice, and I mean, we have already such a low consumption and related harm. So actually, we don't need to have these restrictions, because people are clever today. They will manage to take care of this themselves. And I think that is not only on this, it's the common approach today to all policy issues. And that's what I'm repeating. We need to find a way how to find where the common interest with other fields, not only alcohol, to do now. I think to go back to see if you can find this close Nordic cooperation again, not to work separately countries, but to support much more of that kind of, because when we negotiated for the monopolies in become members in the EU, we worked together. The ministries of health in the Nordic countries, and also all others. I mean, I think that we are much stronger if we find a better way of structured cooperation, not only separate meetings like this, a structure where you actually agree on things to do, all of you, much stronger. So I think that, and it's actually to protect the welfare state. I'm so happy, as I've come from this social background. It's so much about the welfare state. If you lose the welfare state, you have an individual state. So it's not just about alcohol policy.
No, and that's, of course, then we'll get the model of the United States, which is not very, but I think that the Nordic, I saw when EU became members of the EU, I saw the benefit of the Baltic states, the relationship between them, and which is when NordAN was also part of that thinking, that we should have and this is a bit broader also to address because these issues are, because I think from back when I started, the consent on the policies are much wider now in Europe, so on the alcohol side, but there can be also on some other sides. But there is also the whole issue which is related to this is, of course, what will happen now with the United States and Europe, and with the unification of the Nordic countries in security-wise, there is a potential for developing this kind of cooperation within the framework of the EU, or in Norway, maybe not inside it, but there's this sort of Nordic-Baltic cooperation as a sort of with quite closer understanding from history and all that sort of thing. I think that's very important, but it's very uncertain. I think it's going to be very...
And Baltic countries, we see you as a part of the Baltic countries.
Yes, that was what I was...
Of course.
When we're talking now, it reminds me, I think actually the EU alcohol strategy was very important because it happened a lot. When Finland says, we have to look to Europe, well, they should really take a look at Europe, because that's what they're not doing. When I started in 2003, the food pyramid in Italy, what is healthy eating, it was 1 bottle of wine per day for men and half a bottle of wine per day for women. It's not long ago, it's 20 years ago. You won't hear, that is not on the agenda today in Italy. It's not even close.
If you look at some things there, because I'm a little bit disappointed in a way, because so many people say that in the EU they don't have any, and they use as a criticism for the monopolies that actually the rest of the EU also decreased their consumption. But they forget that actually, I see you, they forget that actually when we worked together on the EU strategy, that was a moment where all the EU countries almost joined in, we should have age limits in the Europe. No, very few had. Maybe it's not good to drive when you're drunk and so on. So maybe we should have a common level. So it was quite a lot of things that we actually changed when it comes to the rest of the EU, when it comes to alcohol. And we forget that. And that has also had an impact. I was saying, you can when I was sent to the Commission, from a personal point of view, in Sweden, also those working with alcohol policy said, well, now you have to go there and spread Swedish alcohol policy. You have to make them... And then I realized, I thought even before, no. If I would say you should do like we do in Sweden or in Norway, well, no one would have listened. So actually, the thing that was important then and important now is actually to identify the common interest. Where we actually, as you mentioned also, because we have common interest. At that time, it was the common interest that we didn't want young people to drink alcopops. And when we started to look to other ministries, actually also, yes, the French, they are really concerned. They were the one who actually pushed more than the Nordic countries. Without France, we wouldn't have the EU strategy. So I think that the learning, also when I actually was together with Cuba, you remember who that?
Our friends.
Yeah, when we negotiated a whole week before the health, I've got the name now.
WHA. World Health Assembly.
World Health Assembly, thank you. Starting to get old. Actually, we won the negotiation that week when we said, you were there or you were there. It was only me who was.
I was there.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
because I was cheering together with this Cuban who actually was against a little bit. But then we sort of. No, but the thing is that when we try to respect each other, not to see them as enemies, not to attack countries who didn't agree with everything that we said, actually it's functioned in the end. On the last day, I remember when the representative from the US said, well, now Obama is the president, so now I can say USA support the global strategy. And then it was adopted. Of course, it's watered down. Of course, EU strategy was watered down, but you can't expect to have everything. You have to set step by step and long term, work in a long term. Put up what do you want to agree next year, for example.
You must have revolutionary patience, and this was the fourth WHA where they took the decision from the first one we started 2005.
It took several years.
That is a long term, but I think the role would be, and exactly that I think is very important, which you mentioned also, that it is, and that was why we were having the Brussels office, was not to be a missionary station for Norwegian policies, but to find out what was getting on and use that back home. Because I tried to tell the temperance drivers that they, instead of having hired a football team at the Rosenborg Football Club up in Trondheim to drive around a closed field, and with different level of alcohol, and then measure how quickly they stopped before a sort of a warning, and then they found out that they stopped slower when they had more alcohol. And I said, you should rather go and tell the Norwegian people that in Spain they have different levels for driving license in relation to the demand of alcohol use on age. You have to use it, tell that there are, because the idea by the general Norwegian member of the taxi queues have a view of alcohol policies. It's that everything is free in Europe and everything is regulated in Norway. And when we had the commission, the alcohol commission, which I was heading at some stage in the 90s, and we were coming late night in Luxembourg because we wanted to have some food with train from Paris to Luxembourg to DG's uncle. And we suddenly realized that there were no restaurants open at 10:30 in the afternoon in the evening in Luxembourg. They were all closed except one, which was called Bacchus. That was the only place we got in and got some food. But this is very important to understand that is why. What does the public understand, and what sort of information do they need?
Yes, but what I wanted to add, not to talk just about this, one other that's always been successful is actually to target parents.
Exactly.
Parents are also key. We can't say that the changes in alcohol consumption is due to parents being more sort of whatever, but at least I can see that the norms has changed a lot. That not to serve and to be more careful when it comes to alcohol and young people, and they also care about when they are hurt, their own children. So, and they are the generation, I mean, parents, they can be parents from 20 to 60 now.
70
even, some men at least. So
Even women to 60.
But at least I think that, so we see that as a small group in a couple of years here, but parents are quite, because I'm now a grandparent, and of course I'm as much concerned about my grandchildren as I was for my own children. So to target the sort of, they can feel solidarity, parents, because they don't only think about themselves, they think about children. their own and others. So concentrate a little bit more on how to, I know that EQ, for example, there's a very good examples in all countries actually, not only in the Nordic countries, but parents, they are a key group if you target them in a way where they get support. For example, how to talk with teenagers.
No, I do think we are now peering into some areas which I thought I'm not following very closely now, except I try to hang on your invitations from the WHO and the different meetings there. But the whole thing during the COVID and the development of the reduction in alcohol use upon separate group, particularly youth, have some other, is not sort of necessarily caused by the alcohol control policies. But it may be that the alcohol control policies has been a kind of protection for keeping, but then there are other elements that are developing this. And this is of course very interesting, and this is partly being used by those who want individual decisions to say that we can get some results with other measures than the alcohol control policy. But the interesting thing is to see why, or I wonder whether that's how that is now approached. And also this with the COVID that you saw that they didn't move in pari passu in equal steps, but there was a diversion between those who started to drink more and those who started to drink less, which was also different from what was the general tradition from before. And then it'd be interesting to hear where one stands there on the research issue, because that can be, one has to be aware of it so that it's not been used as an argument against control policy.
Shall we take the last minutes to Maria, what do you want really is most important for the future of Nordic alcohol policy?
I don't think that I dare to say exactly. I would say one thing when it comes to retail monopolies, first of all, then, because that's the issue for the moment on the political level. There's other. I would say do whatever you can to keep public support, because as governments, the only thing that would save it in the long term would to keep the public support. That would make it almost impossible by the politicians to abolish the monopolies. As long as you have a strong public support, I think at least the chance that they will survive is bigger. But concentrate on other things as well. And I also want to say to you from WHO, I'm so happy to hear that the monopoly report will be ready in the end of November. I would send my greetings to the people at the WHO office that it will be published. I'm happy. As you know, I've been working a lot with it. So send them my love that it will be published.
I will, that's written.
Yeah.
And I hope it will not delete the monopoly from the best list of best practices from the WHO. But
I haven't seen the last
that's why I'm done. But I think that there is one thing I would say that I think one should have in mind from the organization side, and that is that the whole background for the alcohol control policies in the Nordic countries was the harms to others in the old times. And that is the thing that is having to be challenged, because I'm not saying that we have an individual ideology which is very strong with the young people. That does not mean that they are not individually solidarity with their locals, but that is also an argument, and I mean a real argument that it is in one interest. So solidarity is about your interest in approaching a problem, and so I think it's very important that one is picking up what now the research is starting to do, when they left the whole harms to others with the epidemiologic studies of the 1970s, and now coming back in the beginning of the 2000s, and that can, because that is where you win support. I think that is quite clear that it is the harms to others that is the core issue.